Hi guys, today we will be looking at the non-state actors. Our first non-state actor that we'll be looking at is a global terrorist organisation, which is ISIS, and then we will be looking at a legal organisation, which will be Amnesty International. So in terms of the key knowledge we need to know for ISIS in Unit 3, Area Study 1, are the aims, roles and power of a global terrorist movement. With our aims, we need to be able to explain them and assess the extent to which the terrorist organisation can achieve these aims. We need to be able to explain the roles of a terrorist organisation, and we need to be able to evaluate the power. So how do they have power and how do they not? And then finally, evaluate the extent to which they have been able to challenge a state's sovereignty. So those are the key skills and the key knowledge. As we know, the blurbs can also be accessible. So I'm just going to read out what it says. Non-state actors include a range of non-governmental organisations that pursue global objectives in relation to particular areas. For example, human rights, environmental protection, organised religions that engage in international advocacy, and for groups that do not accept the legitimacy of the state, such as terrorist organisations. Citizens' participation in global NGOs is increasingly facilitated by dramatic changes in communications and technology. So something that isn't listed in our skills is knowing how communication and technology has enhanced the actions of a group. So that means that they can still test this even though it isn't listed in our skills. So make sure that you do have in your notes how ISIS have been able to grow in their power because of communication and technology. Also, in our in past exams, they have actually specified which NGO or non-government, non-state actor to talk about. So in the 2020 exam, they actually did specify a legal organisation. So Amnesty International would be the one that we would talk about. So they could actually ask for you to actually talk about ISIS specifically if they wanted to. So let's go through now the aims of ISIS. So I've here tried to link it to specific examples and just so you could be able to explain it. So with ISIS, their aim is to establish an Islamic caliphate in Iraq and Syria and spread its influence globally. A caliphate really means that they want to actually be able to establish like a community, a country, a group of people that all have the same idea as them. So which is to be a strong believer in the Islamic faith. And also it's a fundamentalist, extremist version of Islam, and spread their influence globally. Now, they have tried to do this through actually having cells that have been established not only in the Middle East, but also Africa and Asia, and through recruiting fighters from many countries. You know, there've been maybe 30 to 40,000 fighters that have gone to Islamic, to join ISIS in Iraq and Syria, showing there that that's how they've tried to establish a caliphate. One of their aims also is to establish territory, also to seize territory, and in Iraq and Syria, create government and public services in territories under its control. They did at some point actually have a decent amount of territory. You know, 88,000 square kilometres of territory had been secured, and they did control 8 million people. So they were in this sense quite successful in achieving their aims. And finally, their aim is to return to a true Sunni Islamic world. So that is when, you know, when they believe the true, you know, everyone really does deeply follow this faith, and they do take a very, very strict reading of the Quran. Okay, so going into roles. So what their role here is, well, their main role is really to use violence against citizens through asymmetrical warfare. This helps them achieve their aims. So in order to establish an Islamic caliphate, they use violence to achieve their goals. So we can see this through hit and run tactics, as you can see when they did suicide bombings in 2019. They have done a series of suicide bombs in the Philippines between, pretty much 2018 to 2020. But this attack in particular killed 22 people. Also, they have claimed to have committed up to 100 attacks in 2020 in Egypt. Their violence is propaganda for them. Every attack that they do is, obviously shown on the news, which they then use to help attract more followers. And their another role is to spread their message. So through their attacks, they are spreading a message, whether it's for people to join their Islamic caliphate or, their anti-West message, but they are spreading a message. And they also spread it not only through the attacks, but also through the internet. We'll get to their use of communication, but the internet really has been quite a strong point for them to gain more support. So really, globalization has facilitated the actions of ISIS. So also through using the internet, they have been able to recruit foreign fighters and be able to spread their message and share propaganda. Okay, so let's talk about the power of ISIS. At some points they have had power. They have rivaled the power of the state. And this was seen in 2017 when they did hope to establish a caliphate in Menando Island in 2017 in the Philippines. It did result, in a 5-month campaign against the Filipino government. However, at one point they did have a caliphate and, they were raising a flag and they did think that they had enough territory. And in that sense, then they did challenge the sovereignty of the state because the Philippines weren't able to have control over this area because these radical ISIS fighters did have control. In their peak, which is really how they have power, is through their membership. At one point they did have 65,000 people support them, which gave them power because it meant there was more people that were advocating for them and more people determined to carry out attacks for them. However, they have lost power over time. In 2019, they lost their territory in Iraq and Syria, and membership dropped because a lot of people either died in these attacks, like through their suicide bomb attacks, or they did get caught. In Syria, there was 1,200 Islamic fighters that were detained in prison, meaning that ISIS then didn't have as much power as what it previously did. Also, their power has been threatened by the international community rallying against them. We've seen this with the US with Operation Inherent Resolve, where the US actually had a mission to attack ISIS by, going into Iraq and Syria and completing airstrikes, but also through the global coalition against ISIS. This has really threatened their power because there's many states here that are against ISIS. 83 states have all united against ISIS and have all decided to fight with the common goal of defeating ISIS. So that also threatens their power because it does mean that they will attack fighters. Okay, so you can see here how they do, and at one point how they did have power, but also that their power has diminished over time. Okay, so how ISIS has used communication and technology. Through technology, they have been able to use the internet. So, the internet, social media, and the dark web have been used to attract supporters. We can see here the number of people that supported them on Twitter 46,000 Twitter accounts were established in 2014. They were found on TikTok in 2019. That allows them to drive engagement and to get more people to join them. So through technology, they're able to communicate with people, able to spread their message. Also with communication, so obviously it's facilitated by technology through social media and through the internet, but also the technology has allowed them to recruit people. Like I said before, between 30 to 40,000 fighters have travelled to Syria and Iraq to join ISIS. So without the internet, ISIS wouldn't be able to actually recruit foreign fighters in this way. Also through the internet with communicating, they had marketing initiatives. So, like a hashtag that they were using on a weekly basis. They had one called Jihadist Follow Friday, encouraging followers to use hashtags to gain followers while promoting a message on a weekly basis. So that's how they've tried to communicate with their followers. All right, let's look at though how they have actually challenged the sovereignty of a state. So they have been able to challenge the sovereignty of the Philippines when, in May 2017, they were on the island and they declared a caliphate, and for 5 months there was chaos. 85,000 people had to be evacuated. Martial law was implemented. The Philippines had lost control of this area, and they had to engage in a military conflict with these ISIS fighters. However, they didn't really succeed because after 5 months, the military were able to defeat ISIS. They killed the militants and destroyed that caliphate. But you could probably still say though that in the Philippines there is still a power struggle. These people, or ISIS, still exist there. They have committed attacks since 2017. So they have in some ways been able to challenge the sovereignty of the Philippines. This is just one example though. You may choose to talk about though Iraq and Syria, how they at one point ISIS did have control of 88,000 kilometres. Okay. So we have here a question from last year's exam. With this question, they did ask for legal organisations. So you wouldn't have been allowed to talk about ISIS. You had to talk about Amnesty International. The questions were to outline the aims and one aim, 1 mark, and analyse the power. I'll explain the answer for power. Analysing the power. For many students, the bulk of their response was an evaluation of power. While this is generally enough to gain some marks, it's not enough to gain full marks because it's an analysis. It's recommended that teachers encourage students to engage with how and why a non-state actor is powerful or how they lack power. So we're not talking about how effective are they with power or how much power do they have. It's more how do they have power and how have they lacked power. It sounds quite similar, I know what you mean. So when we're talking about here non-state actors, their formal membership base and social media following, funding and resources allow them to have power. So with Amnesty International, they have significant power due to their large supporter base, 7 million supporters in over 150 countries. Through its role of mobilisation, Amnesty International can present an unprecedented challenge to the state sovereignty of actors who do not uphold the universality of human rights due to their ability to direct global condemnation to states that violate human rights standards. For example, in 2015, after receiving 800,000 signatures, Nigerian authorities were pressured enough to pardon Moses, a man sentenced to death over a confession obtained under torture. However, whilst AI can exert power by pressuring states through public opinion, like all non-state actors, they lack sovereignty and it is thus limited in its power as it cannot sovereignty and is limited in its power as it cannot exert hard power and lacks an effective enforcement mechanism to ensure that international laws are upheld globally. For example, in response to allegations regarding the unjust treatment of the Uyghurs in Xinjiang, a Chinese spokesman has said that AI often made irresponsible comments based on rumours and hearsay. Hence, AI is only powerful if states are willing to accept its advocacy. Otherwise, the state remains the most central actor in global politics. I like how they've ended it there saying that, states remain the central actor in global politics, because although the question doesn't ask for it, it shows that they've actually read the study design and understand that this unit is about how states' power has been challenged and how states, are the central actors, but we have non-state actors, TNCs and IGOs that do challenge that power. So it does make it a very interesting discussion. All right, so we're going to stop there. The next video will look at Amnesty International. If you have any questions, just let me know, and thanks for listening.